The Schomburg Junior Scholars Program is going to do nothing but uplift them.
So many talented and brilliant people have walked the corridors of this amazing institution over the years. From Octavia Butler to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Ella Fitzgerald, Alvin Ailey, and Harry Belafonte, who graced the stage in this room of the American Negro Theater.
This place evokes great memories. It was a gift to us in our community to really try to find that space to reflect expressions of Black experience. I just knew that the environment and what I saw these young African Americans doing was a place I needed to be.
What is my Schomburg Center? I'm standing here at the Cosmogram, which underneath holds the ashes of the poet Langston Hughes. On the evening when this Cosmogram was dedicated, people began to empty out of the auditorium. A jazz trio struck up, and to my amazement, Amira Baraka went over and asked Maya Angelou for a dance. And they started to dance on top of the Cosmogram, on top of the ashes of Langston Hughes, and I felt what a fitting way to kiss the memory of Langston.
The Schomburg Center is a research institute and a library, but it's so much more than that.
There's something going on every day.
So many amazing people come here to talk about their creative craft, to share what inspires them. The Schomburg Center's collections help to tell stories even beyond our walls.
The Schomburg Center is here in this exhibition at MoMA, One-Way Ticket, Jacob Lawrence's Migration Series. We depend on the resources of the Schomburg to enable us to tell this story. Thinking about the implications of the past on the present is absolutely crucial for understanding the next steps, understanding what we have to do to go forward.
We today have the responsibility of making sure that new artists and activists, new scholars and poets know that this place continues to be a resource and a source of inspiration for the work that we must continue to do.
The Schomburg Center is knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is education.
The Schomburg Center is home, it is family, it is foundational.
The Schomburg Center is inspiration.
The Schomburg is with me in everything that I do.
Community, inside and out.
The Schomburg Center is us.
The Schomburg Center is you, and we invite each and every one of you to find your Schomburg Center.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming today. My name is Neal Ludevig. I'm the curator of the 50th year anniversary events taking place this week. This conversation marks the first event of the Future X Sounds New York City tour. It's a tour celebrating what makes community special. This is an iconic event in American history. Largely unknown, this event attracted nearly 100,000 people for events that took place over the course of the summers of '67, '68, and '69. Its final year proved to be a defining moment, illustrating how community, activism, and culture can intersect for a greater cause. Today, we're looking at one specific moment in this series of events, the Sly the Family Stone concert, using it as a springboard for a powerful conversation about community relationships with local police and how that's shifted and changed in this community. When we think about police profiling, when we think about problems with our incarceration system, when we think about police brutality and class divides along race, this conversation is an opportunity to identify how we as community members, citizens, and activists can positively contribute and improve our current landscape. It's incredibly important to learn and preserve the rich history embedded in our neighborhoods and use it as a catalyst for powerful conversations, and to support the culture and the artistry that makes each city special. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Michael Dinwiddie, Associate Professor at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at NYU. He'll tell you a bit more about the incredibly inspiring people that are on stage and lead you into the night's conversation. Thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. One more. Good evening. Thanks, Neal, for that great introduction. And I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. You know, I love that it's Harlem Week, it's Harlem Month, that so many things are going on to celebrate the community. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. You're going to be just amazed. And I'm going to open a discussion about the summer of 1969. We're going to talk about the music, we're going to talk about notions of community, and all those things. And afterwards, we'll take time to have questions from the audience. So I'm doing it in alphabetical order. And our first guest is Gale Brewer. You want to come on out, Gale? Gale is the 27th Borough President of Manhattan. She's reformed the deed restriction process, added caregivers to the city's anti-discrimination law, removed criminal history questions from initial employment applications, the Fair Chance Act, and enforced requirements for street numbers on buildings. You think, why was that? If you're an emergency responder, you need to know where the building is, right? So that's what that's about. In 2018, she served as chair of the Large Cities Council of National League of Cities, and she's been named a member of the 2019 Human Development Federal Advocacy Committee, which advocates policy positions on issues involving social issues, children and learning, poverty and income support, employment, workforce development, equal opportunity social security, and seniors. She previously served on the City Council for 12 years, and she served as Chief of Staff to Council Member Ruth Messenger. Did I miss anything yet? No, okay, good, that's enough stuff. Okay, I'll go on. Gale Brewer. Have a seat, Gale. Yeah, that'll be good, that'll be good. Our next panelist is Jamal Joseph. He's an Academy Award nominee, professor at Columbia University, the executive artistic director of New Heritage Theater and Films, and the founder of the acclaimed Impact Repertory Youth Theater of Harlem. Welcome, Jamal. Have a seat. I'm going to keep reading, even though you can go online and see this, but I think it's important to know who's up here. He served on the advisory boards of the Writers Guild Initiative, Imagination, the Ghetto Film School, and the Maysles Film Institute. He's a former member of the Black Panthers. He spent 6 years at Leavenworth Federal Prison. While there, he earned 2 college degrees, wrote 5 plays, 2 volumes of poetry, and founded a groundbreaking theater that brought prisoners together, all different races, to fight notions of violence and racism. He was named one of the top 12 African-American New York educators in the Daily News Black History Month issue. He's been featured on many shows on television, and he's had a number of fellowships. And the one thing I will mention, he was cited the Paul Robeson Citation Award from Actors Equity. Jamal Joseph. Welcome, Jamal. Okay, this is Brother Cyril, Brother Bullwhip Innis Jr. I love this introduction. Cyrus Innis Jr. Cyril, oh my God, how'd I get? And downstairs, what did I call you downstairs? Cyril, okay, good. I was like changing, I'll keep changing the name. Cyril, Brother Bullwhip Innis. I just enjoy it. He's a 5th generation captive African survivor of refugees, one of the Black Panthers that took part in the Harlem Cultural Festival event in 1969. He's going to be the first person I ask a question of. Born in Flushing, Queens, raised in East Elmhurst, Corona, Cyril was briefly in the Air Force in his early 20s. We won't talk about that. At 23, he became a worker at the Malcolm X Community Center. During this time, he was approached by the Black Panther Party for self-defense in 1968. He quickly joined and became a part of the second Panther office to open up in Queens, New York, eventually moving to the Harlem branch shortly after. During this time, Cyril worked to create the Right On newspaper, running the distribution of the papers throughout the East Coast. He worked for 17 years in the Board of Education, New York City, and for the Department of Youth and Community Development for 23 years. His stance, once a Panther, always a Panther, still rings true, and he holds immense pride in his mindset. He now spends his time volunteering and is currently on the board of the Schomburg Corporation and a volunteer in the library. Cyril, Brother Bullwhip Innis Jr. I finally got it right? Mi amigo Felipe Luciano. C'est tout que je parle. Felipe is a 2-time Emmy Award winner for his reporting. Felipe Luciano was America's first Puerto Rican television anchor. He is a member of the original Last Poets, the group of Black Power era advocates who were mentored by Amiri Baraka, Politically charged live music and spoken word poetry performances in the 1960s prefigured the emergence of hip hop and rap in the 1970s and 80s. Luciano is an advocate for inter-ethnic communication, the host of Street Talk, and a founder and chairman of the Young Lords Party, which I'm going to ask him about tonight. And he's led to provocative political workshops in Harlem that attracted progressive intellectuals and artists, including leading figures of the Black Power movement like Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown. A talented diversity speaker, Luciano, who is of Afro-Puerto Rican heritage, like Arturo Schomburg, is committed to community empowerment, ethnic pride, and civil rights. This commitment was pivotal to changing the color and complexion of politics, culture, and society in New York City. Welcome, Felipe Luciano. Hey, Felipe, is that right? You like my Spanish? And last but not least, someone who you will all know, Voza Rivers, Tony Award-winning and Grammy-nominated producer based in Harlem. He's the executive producer and founding member of the New Heritage Theater Group, established in 1964, and executive producer and co-founder of Impact Repertory Creator, led by U.S. Director, Activist, and Educator Jamal Joseph. He's a former police detective in New York in the 1960s. He's now an acclaimed producer of theater, music, television projects, film festivals, and music tributes in the United States and around the world. He's worked with artists including Nina Simone, James Brown, Ray Charles, Count Basie Orchestra, Tony Bennett, Max Roach, Celia Cruz, and countless others. Voza Rivers. So you guys are gonna have to bring out another chair because we have another guest. And this is very important. I don't know why there's not one here. I guess this is supposed to be mine. But you can make it if you try. Fred Stone is the senior pastor of Evangelist Temple's Fellowship Center for 24 years in Vallejo, California, where he grew up. He has one brother, his name was Sly, 4 years older. He had 3 sisters, Rose, Valletta, and Loretta. He, of Sly and the Family Stone, has 6 children, 11 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. I know that makes you all feel very young, right? And when I was talking to him downstairs, he and Sly founded the group from 2 different groups. There was Freddie and the Stone Souls, that was Fred Stone's group, and Sly's group was called Sly and the Stoners. So, Fred Stone. You're on the school. I don't know how to school. The school is fine. Okay, good. So can I be in the group? Did that singing go okay? They have mics? Good. All right. So as I promised, I want to start off. Here you go. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for being here. This is going to be so much fun. Oh, I love it. They've got visuals too. Wow, cool. I'm going to start off with Cyril, Bullwhip, Innis Jr. I want you to tell us how you heard about Black Woodstock and what it was like for you being there. Would you pass the mic? Oh, there's one over there? Oh, we have mics. Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay, good. I didn't see them. They sat on them. Okay.
Testing. Okay. Thank you, Felipe. Okay, back in 1969, let's go back during time of everything was happening. And the Panther Party was here in Harlem. I was one of the people that was in charge of security in the Panther Party. And we were approached and asked that they were going to have this event, would we monitor the park for them? What happened, we were told that the police wasn't going to do it. This is what we were told. But as we all know, that is not true because, you know, they do come undercover in many ways. So we were there, and we took up the position of taking care of the park, protecting the people. This was our goal to do this. Now, it was a good thing at the same time because here we are with Sly the Family Stone and all the rest of the groups that was up there. It was a good thing, y'all. And it was interesting to know this was the Harlem Cultural event. Now, when I was asked about this in the beginning, I was told about a Black Woodstock. And I'll be honest with y'all. I searched, asked my comrades, we do security for Black Woodstock? And everybody looked at me and said, no, I never heard of that. So I did some research because the Panther, we have a thing that we call no investigation, no right to speak, okay? So I started investigating and asked people, and I kept finding, and I kept pushing, and kept finding, and kept pushing, until KC, right here, told me, he said, you know, that event that's called Black Woodstock was actually called a Harlem Cultural event. And I said, oh, yeah, we did that security, but where did Black Woodstock come from? So I had to adjust myself and remember what we did that day.
Hal Tulchin, who was a filmmaker who filmed all of it, thinking that one day it would be a television special, started selling it and branding it with the idea, calling it the Black Woodstock, with the idea of using the publicity from Woodstock. I believe that's what there's an article in the Rolling Stone, August 9th, which talks about it, and that's what they put forth. Also, the other thing that's interesting in that article, thanks. I really wanted you to give that story so we would all know. Now, I have a question before we get to other questions for our panelists. How many of you were at the Harlem Festival? How many of you were there? How many people? Okay, 1, 2, okay. How many people had heard about it before this week? Okay, so this is really an important moment for us to be thinking about why this one disappeared. That year, 1969, there were 30 festivals all over the country. 5 of them were outside of the country. The Harlem Cultural Festival is one of the most successful, one of the most interesting in terms of bringing the community together. So in terms of talking about the community, I'd like to go now to Felipe and ask him to tell me what it was like being in that community at that time, and in terms of the kinds of relationships that were happening with the police, the community, and people.
The world was going crazy. King had been shot. Malcolm had already been shot. The Kennedy boys had been shot. We thought the world was coming to an end. And we realized that the way the system was exterminating people was not through marginalization, through cooptation, through revealing horrible things about them. They were killing them. This was murder. It was assassination. So those of us who felt that the only reaction to this kind of madness was to stand up and fight back, decided to organize. The Panthers were already in Harlem. I was working at a loft called the East Wind at the time. And that's where the original Last Poet started. It was Guyland Kane, it was Abi O'Doon, it was David Nelson, and me. And I had come in, I had just come out of jail in '66. And I began to talk to people in East Harlem. I didn't know I was radical at the point. I just knew that I was very afraid of little, there was nothing. Once you come out of the joint, you're not afraid of that much, except somebody who's 350 pounds and wants your booty. But it was a rough time. And so I went to the East Wind and told Kane, I lied. I said I could do carpentry. He didn't really want a poet. I did that. But I began to get terribly involved in what we call student politics. Mm-hmm. Queens College. I went there into the Sikh program, thank God for that. And Edelstein was the guy who initiated that. Mm-hmm. Julius Edelstein, may he rest in peace. What a brilliant man. Mm-hmm. And we really, I went there, and as soon as I got into a class like political science, I was off to the races. Sometimes the things that are inside you are never exploited and never drawn out until you hit the right situation. Right. Some of you may be artists, some of you may be musicians, some of you may be dancers, some of you may be revolutionaries. You don't know this until the right situation hits you, and then you become totally engaged. Mm-hmm. And you never knew. All of a sudden, the passion comes out. Well, for me, it was organizing. I had already been in gangs. I knew how to do that. Mm-hmm. Revolutionary organizing has the same principles, but with a different motive. So, as I stayed in the East Wind, a group of Puerto Rican students started coming to the political education classes that I was having. I was teaching Rousseau, I was teaching Frantz Fanon, I was teaching the Federalist Papers. I was doing all of the stuff, Thomas Jefferson, we did the whole thing. But most of my educational effort was directed to African Americans. Puerto Ricans were not into it. In fact, it was a difficult thing. We had so much colorism in the Puerto Rican community at that point that it was a little difficult to even organize. So I noticed that these Puerto Rican kids were coming in, and they came up to me and said, we'd like to talk to you. Now remember what I said, I started with, that things were going crazy in the country. I should also say in the world.
Yes.
Japan was going mad. They had the Red Army. We had the Franz something gang, Badelhof gang in Germany.
Germany, yeah.
We had, remember that? We had them throwing cobblestones in France. Oakland was mad. Oakland had gone crazy. We had the Black Panther Party in Oakland, and they were serious. Pardon me? The GDR in Germany. We knew that something was coming to a head, and so did the intelligence community of this country. But be that as it may, we fought. Fred Hampton said, you can kill a revolutionary, you can't kill a revolution. We kept on, we kept on. So these Puerto Ricans came up, and they told me, we want you to help us. We're organizing this Sociedad del Piso Campos, who's one of the great revolutionary heroes of my country, Puerto Rico. And I'll make this very short. What happened is, I said, I don't think I want to do that. I don't think you're ready for it. My arrogance. I don't think Puerto Ricans are ready for armed struggle. A black Puerto Rican drug addict who was a member of the Sikh program came up to me and said, yo, Felipe, I know, man, I know. They're young, they stupid, but they got a lot of heart. I said, but they can't fight, man. He said, so teach them. And I stood there and looked at him, and he said, something has to happen. We have nothing in El Barrio. So Galen Kane, who was on the side watching and listening to me, by the way, I got to meet Gale Brewer in the Young Lords, who was one of our great mentors, and who at that time was fostering, already taking care of children who nobody wanted, which is a form of revolutionary, which is missionary work.
Yes.
Having said that, I go to Kane, and Kane says, you got to do it. I said, Kane, I don't want to do this, man. Come on, let's be serious. He said, what color are you? And I was a little shocked by that. What do you mean by that? He said, what color are you? I said, I'm black. And he grabbed me by the throat, threw me against the wall. He said, no, I want to know, what color are you? Tears started coming out. I said, come on, man, stop. He said, what color are you? I said, well, I'm brown. What kind of brown? I said, cafe au lait. He said, ain't that cute? He said, brother, I want you to look at me. I am black. I'm cold black. I'm the kind of black that scares America. You cannot reject people because they're this or that or this or that. You need to go, and remember, I was ensconced. I was immersed in the Young Lords. He said, you need to go to that community, the community that bore you, the community that gave you life. You need to go back and organize them. I cried. This was like my dad. I ran out of the loft, and I ran to Rap Brown's house. And I said, Rap, I just got told off by Galen Kane. What the hell is wrong with him? And he listened to my story. He said, I'll tell you what, why don't you pack up? Tomorrow I'm going to Louisiana, and I'm going to Baton Rouge. I had never heard of Baton Rouge. He said, we're going to Baton Rouge. And he takes me to Baton Rouge, which is a town, one of the most admirable towns I've ever seen. Black people there have no problem with guns. They shoot coon, they shoot squirrels, they shoot possums. I mean, this is what they do to eat if they want to. And so he took me to a game. I saw a game at, what was the Southern University was playing Grambling or something like that. And I saw all these white people and all these black people getting together. And finally, I turned to Rap and I said, why did you bring me? Look, this is beautiful. This is harmony. This is racial harmony. This is absolutely gorgeous. I can't believe it. This is what we're talking about in America. He said, Negro, what is wrong with you? He said, these are all black people here. And I was in shock. I said, what are you talking about? He said, these are all black people in here. We got octoroons, quadroons, mulattoes. He ran the whole thing. And he took me on the side. He said, I just wanted to show you something. Because you think that you are because you think you're above it, is when we lose the revolution.
Yeah.
He said every one of these people, some of them informers, some of them punks, but some of them really help us. Remember, the house Negro often was the rat, like Sam Jackson was in Django. But sometimes it's the guy who can tell you when the master's gone, where the guns are, where the food is, and the escape routes. You never know. So he said, stop putting yourself above people. He said, this is where it's at. And he said, so I'm going to take you back to New York, and you have to do the right thing. The Young Lords was formed not by that group. The Young Lords was formed really and inspired by Rap Brown.
Wow, thank you. That's a great way to start us off. You made me think about two things. One is I want to get Gale going, telling us about what her involvement was in that time, because you brought it up, Felipe. And then I want to ask Jamal, because he's involved in arts activism, how he uses that to revolutionize and change the world we're in. So Gale, could you just give us a little background of what you were doing and what you were up to?
Well, first of all, this is the most esteemed panel I've ever been on, so congratulations to Neal and everyone who put it together. It's a huge honor. So in 68, 69, I was in high school, and I'm from Boston, I'll admit it, along with de Blasio and Corey Johnson and everybody else who came to New York. I was here in 70. But the issue for me was unlike others, I think I did know I was very progressive radical, because I almost got kicked out of high school for organizing. You know, you kind of have it in your DNA, but you just don't like things how they are.
Yeah.
I did go in 68 to a ethical culture / camp, which was founded by Julian Bond and Eleanor Roosevelt and folks who care about leadership training. We were all around the country, these pretty radical camps about how to be a leader, to upset the establishment as it is. That was the purpose of the encampment. And to this day, I'm friends with Native Americans and people who are doing good things in terms of wrestling with challenges all across the United States. It was one of everything is who was at these camps around the United States. And that gave all of us, I think, who participated a feeling that we could make a difference. And we almost got arrested in you can imagine in these different rural communities. We were in Montana, some people were in Denver, Puerto Rico, New York. And that was the purpose, was to fight and to learn how to do that. Then for me in high school, we were already organizing against the war. That was another issue that we all spent a lot of time on, along with Dr. King and others. And I want to agree with Felipe, watching the deaths. When you're of our age, to us, the deaths of Dr. King and the Kennedys and Malcolm X, those are what we remember. Young people today have other moments that they are impacted by. But for us, those were an awful lot of funerals to watch on a black and white television with not a lot of information except what was coming off that black and white television, small little TV, no other way of communication, at least in my household. And that simply precipitated when I was here in school, yes, going with a guy named John Medina. I still remember his name too, what I call Felipe's church, Young Lord's Church, several nights just to be part. I don't think I contributed a darn thing, but it was a notion of there's something wrong and these folks are doing the right thing in terms of community organizing. So, I was a part of that, and I think what I know is every time you turn around, something's wrong, and you have to do something about it. That's what my organizing told me. But I was very much involved with ways in which you can change society in high school. You don't get on the student council, so you fight because you don't think the student council is any good. That was the group I was part of. And I think I've continued to do that. But I didn't go to the so-called Woodstock, and I did not know about what we are talking about today. However, in 68, 69, we were all part of what we call beings, which is a word that most people don't know today. And the music of the Stone family and all the other great music, you could literally go to a park somewhere in the United States. New York, California, and in between, and hear the most amazing music. Yes, people were stoned, but people were also caring deeply about their community and their country and each other. There was a real love, L-O-V-E, in the real sense of the word, from my experience. I also had a lot of Cuban friends who had come from Cuba and had actually joined the pro-Castro movement, which was very controversial at the time, and did go to Cuba. It's not on my resume, I'll tell you that right now. But I did go to Cuba, and we used to go to Casa de las Americas on 14th Street, where there was a lot of GDR and some of the other Latin American countries coming together every Saturday night for the best music and the best food. You had to have a password to go up on 14th Street with the elevator operator. So the times are different then and now. Same issues. I have to tell you, there are very similar issues that were taking place, sort of different way that they were constructed, but a lot of the similarities. I actually love these times, as dangerous and as horrific they were in some ways. They brought amazing numbers of people together, and I think we accomplished a lot in our own way. So that's what I was doing.
I think you're right. It pushed our society in ways that we never imagined it would. The music, the politics, the activism. So Jamal, you're involved with activist art, and that's one of the things that came out of that era. I mean, we had the happenings, we had the sit-ins, we had all these different things. We had the Free Southern Theater, but you're doing that now. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to that and what you do?
So let me just talk a little bit about those times.
Oh, please.
Because my training culturally and politically happened all through that era. And when we talk about the music of, Sly and the Family Stone and bands like War and what Joan Baez was doing, what the Last Poets were doing, really the forebears of hip hop, and of taking this thing that we call poetry into spoken word and understanding that it would be a revolutionary art form. So it was the soundtrack of social change. It was the soundtrack of the revolution, right? Pastor Fred Stone and I were talking about, we had coded messages. We were talking about exploring more. I don't know if it was that intent, but we would, from the Panther office, be playing dance to the music, that was code to go do revolution that night. What you doing tonight, brother? I'm dancing to the music. I don't know what And the other thing that the music did was, because what musicians were doing is bringing those forms together so that you would hear songs that was mashing up, they call it mashups today. What Sly and the Family Stone was doing with soul and with rock and with jazz, what Santana was doing in terms of taking the Latin and merging it with the rock, was breaking down cultural barriers, and the movement was doing that in the same way, brothers and sisters. This is real important. You would look out at these rallies and you would see a rainbow sea of folk listening to the same music. And you would see a rainbow sea of folk who were caring about the issues that people were singing about, right? It had shifted from the Motown sound and the stuff that was coming out where people were talking about my girl, my guy, all about love, to what was going on in the world and what we needed to do about it. So what would happen after those concerts is that people would hang out. You'd wind up in somebody's apartment. You'd wind up in a dorm room at City College or Columbia University, and you would talk all night. You'd eat some food, you'd smoke some weed, and you'd talk about changing the world. And this was the important thing. You would take what you were learning back to your communities. So you would hang out with kids from SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. We'd come back to Harlem talking about the war in Vietnam, talking about women's issues, talking about labor. Those kids would go back to their communities talking about housing, talking about police brutality. Remember how bad things were in Harlem in '69. We're talking about Harlem Hospital that was known as the Butcher Shop. You would see a trail of blood and know that it would lead to the hospital because somebody had been shot, because somebody had been beaten. You're talking about a police force that was clearly an occupying army. that was mainly white, that would whip ass first and ask questions later. In fact, getting beat up by the cops was like a rite of passage for us. One of the things that that hurts me to talk about now is when I was about 11 years old, we'd snuck into the park, we're playing basketball, some white cops came along, and they did what white cops do. You know the park is closed. Yes, we know. What's your goddamn name? We told them whatever our names was. Get home. Smacked us around. They carried billy clubs in those days. Hit us across our legs and ran us out the park. We get about a block away, and we turn the corner, and I'm with my friend Roger, who's crying. And our reaction, my two other friends, is, you crying? You a punk. We had just been assaulted by people who had taken an oath and were on a salary to protect us. We had been brutalized, and we were teasing him because he was in tears, because absorbing that was a rite of passage. So what the music did and bringing folks together did was that's not right, that we're going to stand up together. We reject your music, we reject your culture, we reject your vision of the world. We went from calling it the establishment to the power structure. We went talking about a redistribution of power, redistribution of worth, and making all of those connections and understanding that artists, the black arts movement, the revolutionary arts movement, that we had a duty to stand up. So many of these bands risked their freedom, their fan base, their celebrity by coming out and supporting the Panthers and the Young Lords. My first time, Felipe, on the stage of the Apollo Theater was in 1970 when the Rascals played a benefit concert for the Panthers and the Lords. It was my first time. Afeni Shakur and I were out on bail on the Panther 21 case do it, so that integration of what was happening with music. The work that we do today, Voza Rivers and I at New Heritage Theater with young people, the organization Impact Repertory Theater, is rooted in that vision first articulated by men like men and women in the movement and people like Harry Belafonte, my mentor, Paul Robeson, who was his mentor, that artists hold the key to set direction for society, that you cannot make art just for art's sake. We used to say in the Black Panther Party, Emory Douglas, the only culture worth keeping is a revolutionary culture. The music has to get you not only to shake your booty, but to get out into the community and move. And so our young people use music, they use hip hop, they use dance to talk about those issues, but they know they have a responsibility to be organizers and the leaders of today. We hold up examples of people who were in SDS, the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, where the average age of somebody who was a member, brothers and sisters, was 18 years old. I joined the Panthers when I was 15, and I looked at all the older brothers and sisters, but that's because I was 15, right? They were 18, 19, 20 years old. And when you combine that, the arts and the activism, you have an artivist. And now more than ever, we need people to understand that in these times where Trump has taken away any pretense or veil that things have gotten better, that we lived in a post-racial era, that we can be cool because here and there we're able to have a black mayor or a black president or a black police commissioner, that the systemic racism, that the disregard for human life, that the idea of putting profit over people still remains, and that wherever we are, it needs to be a cry for rainbow unity and for all power to the people.
Amen. My job is so easy. So I want to go back to one thing Jamal said, and then I'm going to bring it over to Voza, because I think he would have something to add here. You talked about Motown. I'm from Detroit. The sound of Young America became the soundtrack of social change. I'm taking that line from you, but I think that's really true. And I think that you even saw that happen at Motown. I'm going to mention Felipe Luciano did an album for the Black Forum label, 1970s, at Motown with the original Last Poets. Motown also recorded, we're going to talk about this in October for a panel at NYU, but Motown also recorded Martin Luther King's speech against the war. They recorded the brothers talking from Vietnam. Some of you may have heard that album. And Woody King did albums with Amiri Baraka. It's called the Black Forum label. They're talking about reissuing those 8 albums. And Elaine Brown, who did a series of songs for Motown, that were requested. Huey Newton was in jail, and he said, you know, Elaine, I need you to sing something to bring up my spirits. And she was like, okay. So she did 8 songs, and that was also recorded by Motown. So even in the sound of Young America, there was a soundtrack for social change. What I want to bring it to Voza now is you were a detective, a policeman in that era, correct?
I had a choice of going to Vietnam to fight in the war or to stay in a community. And I had a mentor by the name of Percy Sutton, who at that time was the borough president of Manhattan. And when I spoke to Percy Sutton about my displeasure of having to even think about going to another country to fight a war that I didn't believe in, he said, well, what are your options? And when I told him what I was thinking, he said, I think the police department is a better selection for you to join and to go into, because while I am the borough president of Manhattan, I will make sure that you are guided in the right direction. And I took that very, very seriously. I'm a product of this community. I grew up on 132nd Street. I went to school in this community. And one of the things that I appreciated going to black schools in a black community was that we had teachers who thought that this particular institution, now called the Schomburg, but back then it was the 135th Street Library, was very important, and that on a weekly basis, our social studies classes were held here. So I grew up with a real good sense of what this community and the people that came before us contributed to this kind of mythic reputation we have as being the cultural capital of Black America. And so with that, and going into the police department, I went in with a whole different attitude. First of all, I knew that it was, for me, going to be a short stay. I'll be there until the war is over, and then I'll come out and go ahead and do other things. But I was also very active in this community. I had the benefit of living in Central Harlem, East Harlem, and Washington Heights. And through those various neighborhoods, I blended in with the culture, the Hispanic culture in East Harlem, and my West Indian culture here in Central Harlem, and African American culture, and then the Washington Heights community. So for me, understanding the community was very important. I also understood that now that I joined another bureaucratic agency called the New York City Police Department, that I had a responsibility as being a citizen of this community to see how I could make right out of wrong. And I was unique, I was different. All the officers who worked with me said that because I put community first. A number of my friends as I was growing up were being arrested because of their activism, and I made sure that if I found out where they were, I would go and visit them and to share with them and communicate with their family, and that was very unique. Percy Sutton kept his commitment to me and made sure that the powers that be in the police department knew that I was special, and they treated me as such. So while in the police department, I had these multiple roles that I played. You'd call them community affairs officers now, but back then there was no community affairs officers, but there were people like myself who were designated to go in and to talk to the community and to try and create another kind of sense of respect coming from the police department within the community. So it was very unique. And at the same time, there was this whole Harlem was percolating with culture and activism. And it was through that I met a man named Roger Furman. And Roger Furman was involved in a theater company that was in the basement of this building. Now it's the American Negro Theater, and back then it was called the American Negro Theater. And he was sharing with me that around the same age I was at the time, 21, 22, that he joined a group of actors that included Ozzie Davis, Ruby Dee, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, and others who met in the basement of this building. And it kind of fascinated me. I was fascinated because this was the same building that I went to every week as a student, a junior high school student. So Roger shared with me that although they joined a theater company, they all took activism as being just as important as the tools that they would get to go on the stage or to work behind the scenes. And I thought that was very interesting. I stayed with the theater, and the theater grew. And then I decided that I would leave the police department.
How many years were you in the police department?
I actually had a retirement from the police department, which means 20 years.
Okay.
But I opted out mentally and physically because they allowed me to have a different assignments that were not law enforcement as much as it was.
And that war was over.
Being strategic. Being strategic. Strategic, for example, I worked with creating something that all police departments use across the country now called CompStat. Yes. So CompStat was a system where statistics were taken on where crime patterns were happening, and that information was put into a computer, and the computer would make recommendations to the law enforcement officers where certain crime patterns were happening and how to deploy police officers. So we were at the very early stages of something that important that we were using locally, but then became adopted by police departments all across the country. I was also part of a task force with the court officers, the probation officers, the district attorneys, and judges on creating policies to correct the injustices in the criminal court systems throughout all of the state of New York. So again, I was just a very unique individual, as my partners would say. But at the same time was very involved and wedded to this whole idea of theater. So I joined the theater company in 1964. Today that theater company exists. It's called New Heritage Theater. We're 55 years old. We're the oldest black not-for-profit theater in New York, and I'm one of the founding members. In joining that theater, one of the things that I knew was important was this multicultural mission. And for me, what was extremely important was that I would look at what was happening locally to see how to produce it for the people in the community with a goal of not making money, but by educating the community and by being a mirror and a reflection of what was happening in the community. So we looked at many areas of engagement in the community and actually produced it. One of the things that we're known for is the work that was happening in the early 80s that dealt with apartheid in South Africa. And we were located in Harlem, a very small theater company. The founder of the theater had just passed, and there were two things that happened that was very, very interesting for me. One was that I got educated about what was happening in South Africa by a person who was a partner with Stephen Biko in South Africa. Stephen Biko was a journalist who was murdered by the police for talking about the dismantling of apartheid in his country. A young student left South Africa, came to New York, came to Harlem, and through Hugh Masekela, I was introduced to this young man. And then he started talking about the important role that theater had in telling the story of the people in a very authentic way that the political system or the ANC and other political groups weren't able to convey. And I just thought that was very interesting because here in Harlem, we were also telling the story of the people who were here, and I just decided that it would really be great if I could be involved in the South African movement. And through that process, I was able to, with a small group, 3 of us, to produce work from South Africa and bring it to Harlem and to the rest of the world. The first play was a play called Voza Albert, and that was in the 1983-84. The play played in this community and then was played downtown and won all sorts of awards. The second play was a play that we did right here on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue, and Harry Belafonte came to see it, and Paul Simon and Quincy Jones, and a year later that play went to Broadway. The second play we did was another play with kids telling the story of apartheid, and that play was called Sarafina. And that play was done here, and then it went to Broadway. And during that period, I knew that I was in the right place at the right time, and it was in this community that I loved. And lo and behold, there was an actor. First of all, I'm sorry, it was a woman by the name of Yuri Kochiyama, a Japanese woman who was interred during after World War II, when they were rounding up the Japanese and putting them in internment camps. And Yuri Kochiyama left when she was finally released from the internment camps. She and her husband moved to Harlem to the Grant houses on 125th Street. And she used to come to the theater and see all of this political work that I was doing in theater, and would share with me that she was going to prison, meeting political prisoners, and bringing letters from the prison to their family members, etc. But what she also did was give me some copies of scripts to read about people who were incarcerated. Lo and behold, one of those persons was Jamal Joseph. And little did I know that when I met Jamal, through another person, Jamal admired an actor by the name of Charles Dutton. Charles Dutton, who was rock on television for many years, was also incarcerated and did time in prison. And Jamal, being in prison, looked at Charles Dutton as a role model, because when Charles Dutton left prison, he went to Yale University, and the rest is history. Exactly. He went on to Broadway and all of August Wilson's plays, etc. Charles Dutton, Jamal meets Charles Dutton backstage. They talk. Jamal is armed with all of these scripts that he wrote while he was in prison, and Charles Dutton and Jamal says, I've been around trying to get people to look at my work, but there's no one who want to do my plays. He says that in all my plays, there are too many characters. And Jamal said, yeah, I got a lot of characters because that's how I was protected in prison. I put everybody in the plays that I was writing while I was in prison.
Well, let me ask you a question, Voza, because I really want to, that's really amazing, first of all, to find out how you connected. But you talked about your involvement in putting community first. In some ways, you were a community affairs officer before there was such a thing as a community affairs officer. Right. And so when we get to Harlem Festival, we have a situation where the police are not protecting the musicians. The Black Panthers are called in. I just wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that. Sorry.
Well, the difference is that because they would not put me on assignments like that, because I was too close to the community, and I was a team of one. I didn't have another partner. Right. It was just me. Right. So I knew what was happening. I had a lot of friends who...
But I'm trying to understand how we could have an event like that, and the police would say we're not going to protect the people there. I I'm just trying to have a
Well,
feeling of what that moment was like.
I think that's, I don't believe that the word of not protecting was something that was shared by everyone. I believe that at that time, there were a group of police officers intent on not respecting the artist or the community. But by and large, the people that I worked with who got a chance to know me never showed that kind of disrespect around me, because there was something that they feared because of who I was and how I was connected.
Well, that really helps me go to some of the questions that people, thank you so much. I mean, I have to tell you, you've told me, I've known you for 30 years, and you told me stories that I had no idea of, and I'm so grateful for you sharing that, really, because it's really something.
But I want to share one thing about Jamal. After Charles Dutton recommended that Jamal meet me, I met Jamal and found out that he lived in Harlem and I lived in Harlem. I love kids. Jamal, at a young age, was incarcerated and went to prison, and we both said to each other, what can we do in this community to get our young people to understand that, yes, I come from law enforcement, but that doesn't define who I am. He was an incarcerated person, and that doesn't define who he is. And together we worked very closely. And the very first play that Jamal wrote was done right here, and I produced it with Charles Dutton in it, right in this theater when he got out of prison. So for us, this is sacred ground.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you.
You know, I have to go back.
Oh, Voza has another engagement tonight. Thank you so much, Voza, for coming and being part of
But what Neal wanted to tell me, one of the other hats that I wear is I'm the executive producer of Harlem Week.
Yes.
And this is our 45th.
Woo!
And this is our 45th anniversary. During the next 30 days, we have 111 events that we produce. And this Black Woodstock being a part of Harlem Week. So I wanted to share on behalf of Harlem Week, thank all of you guys for coming out. Thank you.
And tomorrow night, I'll be at the Apollo Theater to hear the panel there. So thank you very much. Tell Uncle Herb hi.
Just a really quick comment on the lack of protection at the event.
Yes.
The attitude of policing in those days, and blatantly so, we used to talk about this to point out the contradiction, who the cops were in the community to protect.
Yeah.
And that's why your grandmother might call, I'm talking about in Harlem, and say that there was a man at her window who had broken out the window pane and is coming into the apartment. And the cops would come 30 minutes later, an hour later, if at all. And a white store owner on 125th Street could say, there's a guy across the street reading a paper looking like he's thinking about robbing a store, a black guy, and they'd be there before they could hang the telephone up, because they were there to protect property, not people. Yes. And we talked about this briefly lately, that attitude going back to the slave patrols of seeing the black body as property, not as a person. So what was important to the community was not necessarily important to the police department, because it wasn't important to what the idea of policing was supposed to be or who they were supposed to protect.
Right. Before I open up to our audience, I want to ask Fred, Pastor Fred, to tell me a little bit about what are you looking for?
Me?
Yeah. To tell us a little bit about what it was like to be 1969 at Harlem Festival, what the audience was like for you, what it was like, all those things.
Let's see, where do I begin? 69 was a very busy year for our group. The whole year was very busy. this being, and I just found out 3 weeks ago that about Black Woodstock. I didn't know that either. But the festival itself was, to us, it was great. And I did not know until later on that the Panthers had taken over security. But we were in good hands with the Panthers taking over the security. The climate, it's really strange because I grew up in California and didn't know what a race riot was until I was in junior high school. And a lot of things people in California did not know. When it comes to these situations and trials that one has in one state as opposed to another state. When we were traveling around the United States, we would always go in the front door. We didn't know that some of our brothers and sisters couldn't go in the front door. We thought everyone was going in the same door. We went to Las Vegas. We go in the front door, and the law just passed that people could go in the front door. We go to San Francisco, go anywhere we want to go. Anytime we get ready, play, enjoy ourselves. Go to Tennessee, it's a whole different ball game. Sometimes we go places where Jerry and Greg, that's our white brothers, they'd have our backs. And we go other places where we'd have their backs. It's a very strange thing to grow up in a home where your mom is the babysitter of the neighborhood, and as far as you know, you have 5, 6, 7, 8 black, brown, light brown, dark black, tan, all these different colored people in your house all the time. And you think that's the way it's supposed to be. And you think that's normal. And your neighborhood is fine, but you don't know at that very time that that's going on. There's some people getting bitten by dogs. You find that out after the fact. It reminds me of what's going on today, that, you know, we have this thing where everybody's trying to be woke. And which I applaud that, because I didn't start getting woke till I was about 50. And there's a lot to that. There's a lot in that. Mm-hmm. And you have to be wise, because all of it is not woke. Some of it puts you to sleep if you're not careful. But 1969, the year that we did the Woodstock upstate here, all the musicians we worked with, Jimmy, Santana, Janis Joplin, Creedence Clearwater, Richie Havens, and you can go on and on. That event was absolutely, in my view, flawless. No trouble, no problem. And I don't know why they thought there would be problems at the Harlem Festival. I didn't get the sense that there was going to be any problem.
You know, now you mentioned there was not a single issue raised at that festival, and it was over quite a period of time. Yep. Now today I heard Neal say there were 100,000 people. The article Rolling Stone said that over the time there were 300,000 people, but no issues, no problems with the community. Everybody came to have a good time. And so that's part of what we have to really get back to understand that that's what that moment was about. And that's why it was so important. You know, I'm just going to put a little history here that the festival was started by a guy named Tony Lawrence. It started in 1967, and this was part of it was the idea of making sure that there were things happening in communities so that people had a place to go and something to do. Free festival, 1967, very successful. 1968, even more successful. 1969, amazing. Stars from all over wanted to perform at the Harlem Festival. There was the understanding of this was a kind of Renaissance moment again. I'll go back to that. And they were excited about it. 1970, Tony Lawrence is trying to make it happen. He was an entertainer here. He lived in Harlem. He was from Virginia. From St. Kitts. He had grown up in Virginia and moved here. And he could not get the financing for it. And again, when I looked at the list of the festivals, there were 29 festivals. I said there were 30, but the Harlem Festival was not listed as one of the festivals that had happened in 1969, if you go on Google and go online. So that's already very interesting. And the Rolling Stone article talks about that fact too. So part of what we have is the invisibility of the culture and the ways in which it's disappeared, as opposed to people knowing that there is a vibrant, incredible culture here. And so before I go to the audience, there were questions that came from, there was a young lady, her name is Ashley Sobel.
May I?
Oh yes,
just
please.
Add a little something
yes,
to that.
Please.
There are two reasons for the demise of the culture. The first is that we must understand that any power, any system, first looks at what motivates people in opposition to itself. In this country, in most countries, culture is the most revolutionary tool there is. It can go either way. It can lull you to sleep or it can move you toward revolution. It was culture in 1791, 1794 that rose, that excited Haitians enough to go against French troops. It was Vaudoun that did that. It was the drumming. We sometimes think it was their heart. There was something else that happened. In Haitian culture, what the French forgot is that the people that they had brought in change were actually African soldiers. They had already fought wars. They knew how to fight. In addition to that, you had, I don't know if you've ever listened to Haitian music, it's powerful.
Yes.
It'll get you scared. Yeah. You call for Jesus in a minute. It'll drag you, throw you on the ground. You have to know what's happening. So that's one thing. It is a tool. Number two, culture is the revolutionary spear tip of any revolutionary movement. It is the spear tip of it. Nothing happens unless culture goes first. And the way it works in the world is this way. It's first culture, then politicians, and then religion. Isn't that interesting? You would think that religion would come first. It's not. It happened in Germany. It happened in France. It's happened all over the world. First culture, and the manifestation of culture, the poets, the artists, the dancers, the singers, all of that, the painters. Then the politics follows. And there's an ideological response to culture. And then theological. That's the way it always happens. Now, the second thing is that there was something in the 60s, and I'll end with this, that was remarkable. In the 30s, blacks and whites were coming together under the IWW, and a bunch of farmers were going to, because there was a recession, there was a Great Depression, it was horrible. Blacks and whites were really getting together. The Klan suddenly rose up. How dare you guys get together? Believe it or not, during this Great Depression and what was the Great Sandstorm, what was it called, Gale? The
Dust Bowl. No?
The Dust Bowl. Yeah. Do you know the black and white farmers were coming together. They said, wait a minute, we're all losing money here. And that was rapidly broken up. In the 60s, what was happening, my brothers and sisters, all of you, is that blacks and Latinos were getting together. That was scaring people. Wait a minute. This is a black thing. The Panthers are saying, no, it's not. This is a rainbow coalition. Do you know that in the 60s we had the Panther Party, we had the Young Lords, we had the Native Americans, AIM, and you had the Young Patriots, a group of white guys. And Iwakun, who I still know some of them downtown. Do you understand what's happening? We think that no one is studying us. They are studying us every day. They know what color you want to wear. And now with Google, they can tell you who you like, what people you like, what you want to hear on your Google, on your Facebook. I'm telling you, this is serious business. So you have to have an ideological sense of who you are. You have to have a cultural sense of who you are. In those days, it was just that, damn, blacks and Latinos, this is getting strange. This is getting strange. So there was a conscious effort, I think some friends of mine who have been around, say, on the Department of Defense, wasn't Homeland Security, to never allow the 60s to happen again. Never allow. Isn't it interesting that all you hear, all the hip, I haven't seen one revolutionary after NWA, that was it. They know what culture does to us as a people. Our auditory nerve is so highly sophisticated that we can listen to Train and we know exactly what he's saying. We know what Miles is saying. We know what Jackie McLean is saying. We know what Sly is. Dance to the. It was powerful stuff.
Family.
Pardon me?
All the things. Everybody is a star.
Everybody's a star. Mandrill was good too. Dance. What I'm saying is that, folks, don't think they don't know your culture. You may denigrate your culture, but they don't, because they know it's the thing that motivates you, or does it motivate you? So when you see this lull happening, isn't it interesting that we don't have the kind of response? Where is Cornell and Travis now? I'm not getting this. I love Cornell. He's my teacher. But he sure got on Obama a lot, didn't he? Yeah. Where's he now? Where are all of them now? Why isn't anyone speaking to this madman?
Yes.
I don't see it happening. I don't see artists. I don't see jazz artists. I don't see rap artists. Everyone. I don't see them attacking what I think is probably the greatest threat to democracy in this country. It's fascism coming soon. And yes, sir. And what I'm saying is that culture is a very powerful tool. That's why when I hear what Jamal is saying with regard to his theater company, when I hear what my brother's saying, Mr. Stone, saying about how he was with the Apollo, all of us need to understand that culture is the most motivating tool there is. And if you can harness culture, you have a revolution.
Thank you, sir.
Following back what Felipe said, I want to just say this. You know, we sit here today and we listen to everything on the news and everything that's happening. Am I correct, y'all? Yep. We're all listening to it.
Yes.
Do you see that this man, I don't want to mention his name because I want to give him no credence in life, but 45, he is living right now the way Adolf Hitler did with the Jewish folks in Germany, right now to the brown people of this country. He's doing it in your face. And I'm angry. I'd be very angry. I wish I had 50 years younger because I would step to him. I'm very serious about this. What he is doing now is the most blatant racism that you can do to a people. How do you tell people you got to swear that you will not be sick and won't get no kind of compensatory if anything happened to you, that you have to swear that you're not going to that? Every one of us here today, everybody that sits up here, every one of us today, is one check away from being homeless. Let's be real about this. One paycheck away from being homeless. And you're going to tell me that you're going to play God and say, no, if your child is hungry, that you cannot ask for stipends or nothing, no snaps, no nothing. One thing the Black Panther Party did when we came in, and what we did, and we did it well, and we said we served the people. We truly served the people. We provided, matter of fact, the lunch programs that you have here, free, We started as a free breakfast program. Right. The Young Lords picked it up, free breakfast program. Right. The free breakfast program now is your free lunch programs in school. Your SNAP program is what we start by giving baskets and bags of food to the people. The trucks coming out to the streets right now that see that your medical and everything is what we started when we liberated the trucks from Lincoln Hospital. And they came out to do the sickle cell test, lead poisoning test to see. Mm-hmm. So now, here's this man saying that nobody, if you're going to become a citizen, first of all, what is a citizen of the United States? What is a citizen? This is what I ask, because he's not a citizen. And all the immigrants he talking about, where's his wife from? Come on, my man. Let's be real about this. But y'all need to stand up, and I'm serious, talk to you people and say, look, we can't let them do this to these people like this. We cannot tolerate, because you know the hidden agenda is really not brown people. It's coming back to us. He doesn't want us, they don't want to take care of black folks, and we never asked them to take care of us from the beginning. You know what's so funny? The best part is when we had our own, we lived like people.
Hey, let me jump in for a minute. Hey, you absolutely right. Well, you absolutely right. I absolutely agree with you. And I'm also wondering now, he got all this power that we say he has, but I am looking at everybody that's letting him have the power. I mean, he's trying to call the shots, but how many people are letting him call the shots on both sides who are profiting by him calling them shots? There's a reason why he's up there. He just ain't filling up his pockets. He just ain't doing something just for himself. There's both sides that's profiting because of what he's doing. And that's what upsets me. I never did think that we would have somebody like that. Because I knew that spirit. And we know that spirit. When he came on the scene, I recognized that spirit then.
Of course.
And I just knew in my heart, I say, ain't nowhere in the world the people I know going to let somebody like that handle it. And all of a sudden, there he is. And now that he's up there, it can't last long. And then it keeps lasting. And he can't get around all them lies, and then he gets around all them lies. And certainly folk gonna bust him by now, and they don't bust him. They just pass over it. Then I look at my evangelical brothers that's supposed to be standing up for what is right, not who is right, but for what is right, and they won't even stand up for what is right, and they letting him get a pass. And so I'm looking at this thing differently. It's something big going on here, and it's way bigger than him. He's not doing nothing. He's just another puppet. Yep. Somebody is calling the shots, and it is not him. They just letting him run it.
So, when we talk about, thank you. I mean,
we sitting back watching it.
We preach. But I want
to go to, Pastor.
I want to go to Gale Brewer, because she's somebody on the front line addressing these issues, fighting inside the system, trying to make sure that these kinds of things don't continue. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about how are we thinking about the community in terms of policing now that's different, and how are we thinking about the ways that we can affect change in society?
Well, they're very different than the 60s. I did read the front page of the Times yesterday about we have a lot of horrible presidents around the world right now. Unfortunately, we can't say that we're okay, because we're horrible. Brazil, Hungary, India, Austria, the list goes on. And so the president of Brazil, who's destroying the Amazon, bringing in fossil fuel, etc. But the front page of the Times yesterday had, I come from the tech community. Mm-hmm. He has figured out how to have all the algorithms to be of his ilk for his country. So if you sign up for any kind of a musical interest on YouTube, you end up listening to some far-right musician who has decided whom he has decided as president to make sure is the only gathering you get to listen to. It's frightening.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do to answer your question is we have to use new tools.
Yes.
Because they're using new tools. And I was with someone yesterday who's working in the healthcare system in New York, and poor health and hospitals because the other ones are just interested in money. And all of this is what we are dealing with. In the 60s, there were different oppositions. It is so complicated now. It is so complicated. You can't even, whether it's public charge, which you just described so correctly, or housing, which I work on every day. We have no Section 8. We're barely having public housing. We have no money from the federal government for any kind of support for our housing. And we have fossil fuel issues. We have environment. He wants to get rid of thousands of species of nature. The list is endless. We can't even keep up with it. And all he's doing is tweeting. But he's not the only one. It's all over the country. Right. In terms of the police-community relations, I always say my challenge in the inside is to prevent people from going to any kind of incarceration in the first place. That's hard in itself because the schools are not what they should be. We don't have enough social workers. We don't have enough alternatives to suspension. We have teachers who are not necessarily committed, many are, et cetera. So how do you do the kinds of theater programs that Jamal and Voza are working on so diligently? Not enough funding. They never have enough funding. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we try very hard. Mental health, we hear about all the time. Substance abuse programs. All of this is what we should be focused on. But because of the situation that we just described, we have to work on everything else. Okay. So from my perspective, I was saying earlier, it's like every day you step one step forward and two steps back. Not just because of the president, but because all of these things are hitting you at the same time. I will say there is a little silver lining, whether you're Muslim, Latino, African American, progressive, whatever it is, we're all working together in the sense of fighting. We have our rallies together. LGBTQAI community has been very involved. We have our rallies together. We have our, we fight together. So that's positive. The trouble is there's so much coming at us from so many different directions. You know, what about Title IX? The list is endless. What about Title 20? Funding for abortions. All of these things are at us every minute, and yet you have to keep making sure that you don't let any one of them slip through. They're very smart in those opposition. They're very smart. When I went to Cuba recently, this was a good example. I was there supporting the government on a statue unveiling, and I remember the day I left on a Monday there's hardly anybody in Cuba now in terms of American visitors. Used to be great under Obama. I have friends who have restaurants there. They're empty. Hotels are empty. So long story short, they were going to do a press conference stating, we'll have tourism, these are all good things, blah, blah, blah. The beaches, the wonderful culture, music, food. I swear, I came back to the US, every paper had, there's a disease. If you stay at the Hotel Nacional, you're going to get it. Total fake news. Somebody at the White House, or wherever it is, had heard way down low about this press conference and usurped it. They're smart. And every time we try to, that's all these fires we have to put out, and at the same time try to overcome them. So in terms of the police-community relations, it's part of the same challenge. You don't know what's next in terms of what's going to hit you. We obviously have the situation, as we all know, with the Garner family, and there's other examples around the country. I'm much more focused on New York. I do think that it's improved, but then you see the statistics of the numbers of young people still getting turnstile raps, which they shouldn't, because that's where we should be working on the alternative. So,
the one thing that came up that I want to connect us with, that I heard with many people, was the notion of mentoring. I heard people talk about Harry Belafonte as a mentor. I heard Sidney Poitier. I heard people talking about that. And so I think that's an element that we can think about in terms of our artists from another era connecting with today, our understanding historically what happened, so that we can at least have a feeling of how to combat it. I mean, it's overwhelming, as you say, but at least if we know the history, if we know who Toussaint Louverture is, if we know who Arturo Schomburg and their history and the politics that go into it, we have an understanding of who Fred Hampton was and what he stood for, then at least we have a battle line field to start from. I'm going to stop now because I want to give people a chance to talk in the audience. If people have any questions, does anyone have a question? Please go to the microphones. There are microphones in the back, and we'll entertain those. We have a few minutes that we can do that. So, please. Yes.
First, hey.
Please make sure you ask us questions, okay?
It's a question, not a manifesto. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the panel. So my question has kind of been touched on, but I'd like to know if there can be a kind of concise answer. So in an age of intense social cleansing, community dismantlement, and intense co-optation of Black cultures, how would you folks suggest we best utilize our cultural production capacity, considering we live in a colonial capitalist mess? So as was just discussed, the immense social ills caused by colonial capital that we're living in the matrix of makes it kind of difficult for us to actually utilize our cultural capacity as Black folks. I mean, between lack of access to resources, like instant co-optation of Black culture because of social media and all these things that make it easy to access Black culture outside of Black communities. How would you folks suggest, or what are thoughts you have about utilizing Black culture without self-snitching?
Yeah, one
quick answer.
Yeah. Do you, you don't remember, you were too young. In El Barrio, we used to have house parties in Harlem. We used to have grind-em-ups. Culture was manifested in those grind-em-ups because the children would come, they would see how, young boys would see how fathers act, how gentlemen act. Mothers would dress up. In the Puerto Rican community, it was the dress-up thing of the week, to dance to Tito Puente and Tito Rodriguez. In the Black community, would dance to, of course, Smokey and the Temptations. That's one thing. Culture manifests itself in the most minute ways. Number two, you don't remember this, but in the 50s, we had doo-wop groups. And they would stand right on the street corner and sing and entertain the entire community. The entire community. Rapping started with poetry. I remember the last pause. We would just go to places and just start to what they call spit now, right?
Yep.
And we would spit. Folks, you don't need money. What you need is vision. What you need is passion. What you need is desire to make something happen. I don't know why we continue to do this to us. Well, if you don't have money, you can't do it. If you have the passion, believe it or not, the passion will provide the money.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Tony Ty-Starrett. I'm a filmmaker. Hi, Jamal.
How are you?
Pretty good. So I'm a filmmaker. I've been transitioning from like doing a lot of commercial work to doing more scripted work. And I'm getting, I'm starting to get some success in the, like the network world and everything. But I really want my work to mean something. And a lot of my friends call me disco militant because they're like, oh, you look shallow, but you're really deep and like militant. But I feel like sometimes, like we talk a lot about like Trump and his behavior, his blatant racism, but I don't think that we're really acknowledging the fact that white men are kind of in survival mode, because statistics say that like by 2040, the majority of this country would be non-white. So I've been just trying to understand why they're like that, and I feel like that is why. But now I'm trying to figure out what I can do. So I came here today to try to figure out and ask you guys, like, what kind of books should I be reading? Like, what do artists like myself consume right now for us to be, I hate the word woke, by the way, but just more informed and more effective. Like, I don't want to be a social media revolutionary. Like, I'm trying to really make real change. Like, I'm not afraid. So I just don't really know, like, what path to go, because I feel like there's a lot of fear. It looks like with the Black Panther Party, they were punished for organizing. Or when you think about like Black Wall Street, it seems like every time Black people try to organize and rise up, there's a lot of backlash. So I think that makes a lot of my peers afraid to speak up.
So I want to answer. Can I? Because I want to. I just go through some quick things. Frantz Fanon, read whatever he's written. Richard of the Earth.
Who is that?
Frantz Fanon, F-A-N-O-N.
Okay.
You should watch Eyes on the Prize, Henry Hampton's piece. That'll help you have an orientation of what happened. Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. I'm just saying these things. And then there's a book by a guy named Jeffrey Stewart called The New Negro, which is a story of Alain Locke, who was a professor at Howard University, but in 1916 he gave talks on race. He wasn't allowed to do it on the campus, but they were so radical because he was basically saying race is a social construct. And that thought from Alain Locke, who was one of the people who leads the Harlem Renaissance, gives us a notion of the historical. Are there other texts?
Yeah, there's a woman, a doctor, a psychiatrist, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who wrote a book called The Cress Theory on Color, who some 30, 40 years ago predicted exactly what the point that you made, the racial imperative, and what white America would do, especially white men, do to survive because they see themselves as being, extinct. Yes. To read that. I also would add to that the speeches of Fred Hampton. He is within the Black Panther Party and the Illinois community, he's known. He's one of the greatest speakers and organizers of the 20th century. He actually created the first Rainbow Coalition, the original Rainbow Coalition, because he got gang members together with white working class folks. You can Google Black Panthers and Hillbillies online and see the most amazing meeting of what would be Trump supporters today, with Black Panthers organizing them around housing issues because they understood this idea of all power to the people, which is black power for black people, white power for white people, brown power for brown people, red power for red people, meaning that when people understand that the majority of folks are suffering, are starving, are worried about medical bills, that you can come together. And I would say if we can get people out of chat rooms into real rooms, if we can go underground again. The new underground is actually people gathering in rooms. Yes. We used to talk about taking the movement underground, away from prying eyes and away from infiltrators. But there is nothing like this experience and what you can share and what people can learn and understand what they can do in terms of those grassroots things that are affecting. You're right, we have digital revolutionaries that spend lots of times retweeting and debating and doing this. We've got to get folks into the room, and especially young folks, to experience art, culture, each other's problems, and organize around food, clothing, shelter, and survival. Freedom to someone, we talk about freedom and liberation. Freedom to someone who is hungry is a meal.
Yes.
Hence the Panther Breakfast Program. Liberation to someone who is sick is medical care. Hence the Lords and the Panthers taking over Lincoln Hospital, and Fred Hampton and that team creating the model for national health care. So those are the kinds of things that we have to do, is organize folks around their needs so it's not abstract, do the kind of studying that you're talking about, and get people into rooms, whether it's a Grind 'em Up, whether it's the Schomburg, whether it's a People's Concert. That's the power of the people.
It's true.
I would also add that there are books that are classic that you might want to look into. The first is a guy named Howard Zinn.
Yes.
Zinn. It's called A People's History of the United States. If we don't understand what America is, we can never become American. Now, Malcolm said if you're not eating at the table, you're not American, and I understand that. But we are Americans here.
Right.
That means that we have to not only provide for ourselves, we're going to take over the United States. There's no doubt in my mind. The United States will become a person of color nation, but we're going to have to provide for everybody. We will not have the luxury of saying Irish or Norwegian or Jews or Italians are not part of this. We are part American. So that's the first book I would suggest that you read. The second one is something called the Federalist Papers. I find that too many of us don't know how this country operates. It's called the Federalist Papers. It's a wonderful book.
Alexander Hamilton.
Right. And three, if you can, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by D. Brown will give you the beginning. This didn't start with black people. It started with the total annihilation of Native Americans, by the way, by the Spanish and Portuguese, not the British. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And then the third, if you can stomach it, there's a book called War Against All Puerto Ricans. The War Against All Puerto Ricans. By the way, the first black man in the Americas was in 1508 in Puerto Rico. And it's by a guy named Denis Maldonado. No, his name is Denis. D-E-N-I-S. That's his last name. D-E-N-I-S. What's his first name? Come on, Gale, you should know this. All right. War Against All Puerto Ricans by Maldonado Denise. I'm telling you, it'll blow your mind. Those books will give you a sense, of course, besides reading Fanon, you should read James Baldwin.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, he'll knock you out. And that's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
yes,
you.
sir, right here. Question? We only have room for one more.
I would say definitely as a
Good evening.
No, this gentleman.
Okay, because my comments are very important, and I've been waiting, so please make sure you don't
I won't.
forget
You're going to
me.
get to talk.
Thank you.
Oh, no, it's all right. I can wait. No.
Okay, go on, ma'am. Go right ahead.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jan Greiner from Newark, New Jersey, and I am a student of Black history and of music, and I actually was at the Harlem Music Festival, and I would like to take a few minutes to get us back into the topic of music, which heals the soul and brings people together from all over the world. One of the most interesting things about Sly and the Family Stone, and I do want to give them accolades tonight, is that they were the first group to bring Black and white musicians, male and female, and to write songs that are not only current for today's time, but the past times, because at that time in the 60s, we were going through so many trials and tribulations, which was written about because of the genius of a person called Sly Stone, and of course, Freddie Stone, who is on the stage tonight. One of the great songs was Everyday People. Everyday people, we are everyday people. Doesn't matter, I don't know if you know the words, maybe Pastor Fred's gonna discuss a minute about everyday people, because that song is relevant today. It doesn't make a difference if you're black, white, red, or what shade. We all need to unite together. And the Harlem Cultural Festival was about bringing people and the greatest artist of the day, which was Nina Simone. Nobody's mentioned anything about Nina Simone was at that Harlem Festival. One of the greatest blues guitar, come on, Nina Simone. Yes. Nina Simone was at the festival. B.B. King was at the festival. And then, of course, you have the great, amazing Sly and the Family Stone. Yeah. So right. There's a lot of things. We didn't talk too much about music, which is sad, is giving me a little sadness tonight. That's why I wanted to make sure I got the mic.
Thanks.
And of course, thank you too. The music brings people together, and it heals your spirit. It heals your soul. This is what we need. And today we don't have that kind of music. I mean, Marvin Gaye wrote What's Going On in the 60s. Come on, people. What's going on? And I'd like to say, what's going on today? We need to keep the music alive in our spirits and communicate with each other and bring all of us back together like we're here in this audience. I see people from every different culture, every different social economics, and we need to unite. And one thing we need to do is definitely get together as a people, because if we don't, he is going to get back in. Oh, he's going to definitely get back in. We have to put our differences aside and come together, and whatever your party is, we need to unite. And because if we don't, they're going to get exactly what they want. I'm not going to even talk about 45. I just want to, let Pastor Fred Stewart talk a little bit about Everyday People and how that song came about, because you wrote that song 67, 68, and it's still valid today.
I want to thank you so much. I'm glad you did that, because to look at all the artists who were there, B.B. King, Sly and the Family Stone, Abby Lincoln and Max Roach, The Fifth Dimension, who had the big hit, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Stevie Wonder, Mahalia Jackson, and Moms Mabley, who did not sing, but was there. And of course, yeah, I just want to, so thank you so much for bringing us back to it, because we had a really interesting conversation about the politics of the time, but the politics are informed by the music, the art. The point that Jamal made, that the arts will lead us. The priest departs, the divine artist arrives. That's what Walt Whitman tells us. So, sir, you have the last comment.
Sure.
Question. Whatever.
I guess tying back to kind of some of the themes we were talking about tonight. Again, thank you for having us. This is amazing.
Thank you.
In terms of culture, how do you feel about viewing social media as a form of modern culture? And I mean that as a lot of what you were saying a little bit earlier, Ms. Brewer, about getting information via that television screen, right? And that was the only place you got information. Well, we live in a world now where information can be altered and then fed to you via your phone. So how do you feel about viewing that as a modern form of culture?
Gale, please. Yeah, you can. Please.
Well, I think we're all learning from it. We have to figure out how to use it so that we accomplish some of the goals that have been outlined here today. I don't think we know, at least from my experience, when I read that article in the Brazilian situation on the paper the other day, I was a little surprised that that is so possible. You know, how do you take what we learned that music comes first, which I would agree with, it certainly did in our time, and from that you can be active, you can change the world because of the music. I could be wrong, and maybe others will help me with this, but today so many of these musicians are afraid to speak out. They have contracts, they have fans. There's so much money that is staying on their I say nothing, I just play the music. It doesn't have that same strength that it did before. We were just sitting on the lawns in New York, Boston, Philly, California, listening to these amazing artists, and they were speaking out at the same time. I don't know how this, these companies are huge. We have no idea. We put our name in and we get the information that is market share for the algorithms for what we're interested in. To me, it's almost like another land. Martians have arrived, and we don't know how to combat them to change the world in the way that we want. I think your question is excellent, but the Netflix and so on. My niece is working in that world. It's cutthroat and all about who can be on top. It's not about who can change the world. But others may have other suggestions. You have a great question. I think we're all trying to figure out the answer to it and how it can serve our needs. But it's almost as hard as changing the world in the 60s. It's changing the world with this new dimension.
I think we have to be really vigilant. I'll go to another Sly the Family Stone song, Somebody's Watching You.
Somebody's watching.
And so another thing to study is the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. Ward Churchill wrote a great book about the FBI's secret war against the American Indian movement and the Black Panther Party. So counterintelligence is, intelligence is, like you see in the spy movies, we gather information on the enemy. Counterintelligence is false information. And the Black Panther Party was destroyed by the FBI's counterintelligence program. That divided the East Coast and the West Coast Black Panther Party. I used to have this conversation with Tupac, who was my godson, Tupac Shakur, about the East Coast, West Coast split and what happened. So you have people in the same way that the Russians and other powers tampered with the election. Imagine folks who are not Russian, who are in an FBI office or a CIA office in Detroit, or Virginia or New York City, who's tampering with your movement. This is why it's so important not to think that all of your communication, all of your organizing, all of your ideas can be on social media. Let that be a platform to drive folks together so we can be in the room, understand who folks are, and understand as a people and as a Rainbow Coalition what we have to do.
Understand this, folks. Now, this is going to be very short. The reason Gale is alive, the reason Bullwhip is alive, the reason my brother, he's as close to my brother as my brother, is because we had faith. Now, I'm not going to get super religious, but I'm going to quote something from the book of Hebrews. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I don't care what they do. They cannot stop your faith. And if you have that faith, it's what made Martin Luther King go forward. It's what made Malcolm go forward. It's what made Crispus Attucks go forward. It's what made John Brown go forward. Folks, never lose your faith. There are dream killers out here in the form of social media. Jamal has to go through this every day. In fact, I call him when I'm going through changes. You have to have a faith. Be careful what you put out of your mouth. Your mouth is energy. He hates gossip. He'll tell me, I don't want to hear that. Be careful what you say to people. Be careful what people say to you. Be careful with dream killers. You want to do a movie? The sister was talking about, do the movie. Don't let people tell you you cannot do it. If I had said coming out of jail, I guess this is it, my life is over, I would never have joined the Lords. I would have never been a poet. I've been on TV, thank God. My life has been extraordinary. I'm still going to change it. Faith is what will pull you through. Be around people who celebrate you. If you're around people, be they bed partners, anybody else, who do not celebrate you, drop them like they're hot. Drop them like they're hot. Stay around people who love you, who celebrate you, and who believe that you can do this. Because that is what's going to make America great. I'm telling you, this country's in for a renaissance. You are the beginning of it.
I got to sing. I'm going to sing. I got to sing. You can make it if you try.
Sly and them had songs, and if you remember, and she said one song that was hella fire, and that was Everyday People.
Yes.
If you listen to that song, that whole, and all the verses, remember, he had a son that he loved very much, and then he had another one he could do something to, remember? Listen to that song. Listen to what it said. The songs that were sung that we came up on, that we listen to, that we play every day, that I play now every day, are songs that keep me going. Like he said, faith. Love yourself. Love yourself. Know who you are. Find your culture. Embrace your culture. And love your culture. Learn about others. Don't let anybody tell you about somebody and walk away. Learn on your own. To take it your love. You heard me say in the beginning, they said Black Woodstock. Never heard of it. What did I do? I investigated. I told you, Panther Party members, one thing we were taught, no investigation, no right to speak.
Wow. So, and a quote from Che Guevara, since we talked about, this is one of the first things I saw when I walked into the Black Panther Party office, and it said, it's a quote from a speech that Che gave at the United Nations in 1959, and it was, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, let me say that revolutionaries are guided by great feelings of love.
Oh, I think that's a great way for us to say thank you to Gale, Brewer, Jamal Joseph, Cyril, brother Bullwhip, Innis Jr., Fred Stone, and Felipe Luciano and Voza Rivers. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Brother Neal, for bringing us all together tirelessly. Neal Ludevig. Neal.
Come on, Neal. You want to do something?